This might be one of the largest protest movements in modern US history, and a lot of people still don't fully understand what it is. Millions of people, thousands of cities, and one message spreading across the country: no kings. So what exactly is happening, and why is it getting so big? The No Kings protests are a series of large-scale demonstrations across the United States, primarily aimed at opposing what organizers describe as authoritarian behavior in government. The name itself is symbolic. No Kings represents the idea that no political leader should have unchecked power, a direct reference to democratic principles and concerns about leadership overreach. What makes these protests different isn't just the message, it's the scale. According to organizers, more than 8 million people participated in over 3,300 protests across all 50 states. That's an enormous number, potentially making it one of the largest single-day protest movements in US history. Earlier protests in the same movement were already massive, with an estimated 5 million participants in June and 7 million in October 2025, showing how quickly the movement has grown. These events weren't limited to major cities either. Protests took place in thousands of locations, including smaller towns and rural areas, something that's relatively rare for movements of this size. Major demonstrations were seen in cities like New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, and Minneapolis. In Minnesota alone, estimates suggest that between 100,000 and 200,000 people attended a single rally, making it one of the largest events in that state's history. At the same time, smaller protests were happening across the country, sometimes just a few thousand people, but still contributing to a massive national presence. In total, events were organized across every US state, with additional demonstrations even taking place internationally. So what's driving all of this? The protests are centered around a mix of political and social issues. Participants have raised concerns about things like immigration enforcement and rising costs of living, foreign policy decisions, and what they see as growing threats to democratic institutions. Many protesters describe the movement as a response to what they believe are authoritarian tendencies in leadership, which ties back to the core message behind No Kings. What's important to understand is that this isn't about one single issue. It's a broad coalition of concerns, which is part of why the movement has been able to grow so quickly. One of the biggest factors behind the scale of these protests is how they were organized. Social media played a major role. Platforms like TikTok, X, and Reddit were used to share protest locations, spread messaging, and coordinate events in real time. This allowed the movement to grow in a decentralized way, without relying on a single organization or central leadership. In other words, people didn't just hear about the protests, they became part of organizing them. Data from earlier protests gives some insight into who is showing up. One survey found that many participants were college-educated, with a large portion identifying with left-leaning views. But the movement itself has expanded beyond a single demographic group. What's notable is how widespread participation has become across different age groups, regions, and communities. That kind of broad participation is part of what gives the movement its scale and visibility. When you look at the numbers, this becomes more than just a series of protests. At its peak, participation has reached millions of people, potentially over 2% of the US population. Historically, movements that mobilize even a small percentage of a population can have a significant impact. That doesn't mean immediate change happens overnight, but it does show the level of engagement and momentum. At the same time, reactions to the protests vary. Supporters see them as a necessary expression of democratic participation and civic engagement. Critics argue that large-scale protests don't always lead to concrete policy changes and may reflect polarization. Like many movements, the long-term impact will likely depend on what happens next, not just how many people show up. At Alimo News, we break down stories like this so you don't just hear about them, you actually understand what's going on. If you found this helpful, take a second to like the video and subscribe. We're working toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription helps us grow. And if you want more coverage like this, visit Alimo News.